Dr. Kevin Roberts is on to talk about what is a right? What are state rights? How does this relate to the federal government? Is the federal government overstepping their rights? Well, all this and more with Dr. Kevin Roberts right now.
Praise be to God. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a long time since you and I have talked.
Yeah, it has. I was glad to get the invitation. Obviously, you and I over the last several years have done some Catholic men's conferences, things together. I lead a non-sectarian think tank, but we're animated by our Christian faith and obviously my Catholic faith, including on this issue of immigration, which is the gravest humanitarian crisis I've seen in my lifetime.
So why don't you tell us, where are we at now? I mean, it's kind of it's a conversation that's a bit waned in the news, so not a lot of conversating going on about this current migrant situation on our southern border. Where are we at? What's the deal down there?
Look, I'll write a headline for you and anyone listening. Number one, this is an egregious crisis. It is impossible to exaggerate. Number two, we look at numbers. You've mentioned a couple of them in the McClane sector. The 30,000-foot view is that we've got approximately 200,000 apprehensions of illegal immigrants every month since March of this year. The Biden-Harris administration purposefully reversed some previous administration policies that were protecting the border, which is also a way of saying protecting people, both us north of the border as well as people who want to come here. I don't really hold it against them that they want to come here even illegally. It's great to be in America. We need to be sure that we've got an immigration system that allows people to come here legally and transparently. The upshot is, by the time the summer in Texas begins to wane, some point in September, probably somewhere about 2 million illegal immigrants will have crossed the border, 2/3 of them into Texas.
Wow, 2/3 into Texas. That's pretty overwhelming.
If you go to New Mexico, if you go to Arizona, most of those sections of the border, while they have illegal crossings, are really much smaller in terms of the number of humans coming over compared to the Texas sector, especially the Rio Grande Valley. And the thing that's really frustrating for us at our foundation is what you mentioned regarding COVID in the McClane sector. Again, dial back to the entire border, there has been, over the last 6 weeks, a 900% increase in COVID cases among apprehended illegal immigrants on the border. This is the kind of thing that is a true public health crisis compared to what the president is trying to say about airports and airplanes in other parts of the country.
You know, here's another headline, this one out of the Epic Times. It says, McClane, Texas, speaking of the same place, McClane, Texas, setting up emergency shelter for the overwhelming number of stranded immigrants. It would seem to me that these communities are really forced to have to drop all other priorities, as if they probably had nothing else going on at the time, and really put most of their attention into dealing with this overwhelming number of migrants coming across their borders. How taxing has this been on these small communities along the border?
It's been a huge problem for them, Joe. McClane, if our listeners have not been there, is a bustling place. It's a great place, beautiful culture, beautiful place. It's a place with a lot of economic opportunity because of its centuries-long tradition of people coming from across the border from the south legally to work, going back to their families just south of the border. The humanitarian crisis prompted by the Biden-Harris regime has not only interrupted that very beautiful custom, but it's also interrupted, as you said, the proper business of city and county government. We do a lot of work along the border talking to elected officials of both political parties. And I can tell you, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they are beyond frustrated with the federal government not doing its job in protecting the border. That leads to the state and local governments having to step in to make up for that absence of the feds. That's a real problem, because if you look at the U.S. Constitution, you know that 95% of immigration policy is a duty. It's not a right. It is a duty of the federal government. So at least we can thank God that we live in a state that is led by a great man of faith, Governor Greg Abbott, and great local leaders, members of both parties who are willing to step up. Unfortunately, that does not change the cold, hard reality that if you look at restrooms, you look at sleeping facilities, you look at the rate of COVID among these migrants, this is grave. I mean, this actually is a national embarrassment.
You know, I've always felt like we should be able to come up with immigration policy that keeps the bad guys out but lets the good guys in. fair immigration policy, but it seems like we've never been able to really accomplish that. And now the border seems wide open. You have thousands coming across it. We have no idea who these people are, some of which aren't from Latin America. They're from overseas. We have no idea what their intentions are. Are they coming for a better life? Are they coming for nefarious reasons? We don't know. It seems that our current administration and their policy doesn't seem to care about those motives. What say you, Dr. Kevin Roberts?
Well, I say two things, my friend. The first is, speaking as a faithful Catholic, I agree with that 100%. And it's exactly what we believe. It's what our magisterium shows us, that yes, we of course want to honor the migrant, but we also, in order to honor that migrant, have to protect the rule of law. We have to protect the nation state that has created the prosperity, has created the freedom that are the magnets for these migrants to come here. But the second thing is, if you were to take your statement, your summary of having a fair, transparent system where people can come here legally, but we're keeping the bad guys out, and you were to go do a national poll, 80% of Americans would agree with you. How do I know that? Because we poll every month. Now, we don't believe in adopting positions based on polling data. We're an organization of principle. You're a man of principle. I am. The point is, it's common sense. And I think you look at all the policy that Washington has failed us on, this is number one on the list. And
hold that thought. Just recently, 27 Cubans trying to make it to America, trying to flee communism, were sent back by our current administration. That's their policy to the Coast Guard, was to send them back. They're not allowed to make it to our shores. And yet, if they'd only come across the Mexican border and America, they would have not even been questioned, I'm sure. It seems very schizophrenic. What say you, Dr. Roberts?
Your example is not abusive at all. I mean, it's exactly what's happening. In fact, our research shows that in May and in June, the plurality of people coming across the U.S.-Mexican border were not from Mexico. They were not from Northern Triangle countries. They were from Europe. And so all you have to do is make sure that if you're not from a country near the U.S.-Mexican border, you get there. But schizophrenic policy is, I think, a good summary. And what schizophrenic policy does is not ensure justice. It does not ensure transparency. And so if anyone listening to this is trying to figure out what's going on, what are the roots of that? It starts with policies that began in January. I say that not to make a political statement. I run a think tank. We just deal with the truth and the facts. And the hard facts are that this is very easy to fix. You just need to go back to the policies that were in place that were not schizophrenic on January 19th.
Let's talk about states' rights. Recently, the governor of Texas, Governor Greg Abbott, he signed an executive order that forbids the ground transportation of migrants, these illegal migrants coming across Texas, and the federal government has balked at that. They've put pressure on him. Let's talk about states' rights versus federal policies. Where does this line Where is the line between states' rights and federal government? It seems like we're seeing more and more of this, even in gun control issues. I know Missouri has come out strongly against federal overreach and Second Amendment issues, and there's been many states. The governor in Florida is another great example of this, mask mandates, et cetera, et cetera. What say you, Dr. Kevin Roberts?
Well, I'll spare you the long academic answer on that, and just suffice it to say that our rights as individuals, we conferred to states. They created the federal government. And so whatever sovereignty our federal government has comes from the states. And it's, the best way to think about that is that both the states and the federal government share their sovereignty from us, which leads to the heart of your question. And that is, Governor Abbott, on a number of issues, immigration, as you mentioned, healthcare, gun rights, et cetera, has been very vocal in saying, look, when the federal government isn't going to do its job, and as a result of not doing its job is affecting, it's having a negative effect on individual rights, the state of Texas is going to step up and do it. And praise God that he does, especially on this immigration issue. As a result, just to give you an example, Governor Abbott has sent 1,500 members of the Texas National Guard to the border to make sure that where there are huge gaps in the border, those guardswomen can help our Border Patrol agents. On the matter of gun control, this really is not at all a federal issue. Obviously, gun rights are protected by the Second Amendment. We know in Texas, just to go beyond the Second Amendment response, this is a way of life. Our research shows that where gun ownership is high, cities and communities are safer. The larger point is this, to sum up. We are living in an era in American history where we have to push back on overreach by the federal government on every issue. I would think that listeners to your program would be most motivated, as I am, by assaults on religious liberty by this administration. It is going to be the states, to your point, who become our biggest protectors of that.
And yet, you're a history guy. You have a PhD in it, and I know you know it well. I'm a history nerd. I love to study history, and we can all remember that shining example, mid-19th or late 19th century, where the states, fighting over states' rights, went to war, and some 600,000 Americans lost their lives, and quite a bit of destruction in the process. And here's why I bring this up, is because I find it fascinating, Dr. Roberts, that more and more the talk of secession is bubbling to the fore. We're seeing counties in Oregon and California, the state of Texas, and other states are talking about secession more and more. Not that I think it's possible necessarily, but the conversations coupled with all these issues, states' rights exerting themselves over federal policy, where does this lead? What say you, Dr. Roberts?
Well, I said I would spare you the long academic explanation. I will make a short academic fraternal correction. States don't have rights. States do not have rights. People have rights. And states have duties to protect individual rights. And that's the best way of understanding what's going on. And so, yes, the example from the Civil War is telling. But I think those of us who spend our daily lives pushing against federal overreach can do a better job. I'm talking about myself now, Joe, not using the phrase states' rights, because that's not really what we're talking about. And it also is caught up in the baggage of slavery and Jim Crow segregation in the Civil War. My point is states have a duty. Even Governor Whitmer in Michigan, and, with her liberal worldview, has a duty when she wakes up to protect her people's liberties. That's her one and only job. She's not doing that job. And so I think if we reframe this debate as one in which states are our friends and the federal government is not, then I think all of those public policy areas become much easier to win. On the point of secession, I don't think it's going to happen. And do you know why? Because we're winning on these issues. Even on the issue of immigration, it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. I think the heroism of governors like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis are charting a path to a much brighter future in the near term.
I was thinking about this, and I actually have had this discussion with some friends of mine over the past couple of months, and we've been discussing the idea of rights versus duties. And we talked about the example of, a child. We say a child has a right to their parents, has a right to life, and that thing, and those kind of things. But in reality, the duty is on the parents. The parents have a duty to their children, and because of that duty, the kids have a right to it. In the same way, like you were saying, the state has duties to us, but as I was saying, the children, they have no way of exercising their rights. They have no way of being able to fight back. So we're talking about secession and that kind of thing. How on earth are we supposed to, as state citizens, because I know here in Houston, I'm assuming it's the same all over the United States, we have the Houston mayor saying, we're disobeying Greg Abbott's order. We're going to reinstate the mask mandate, and we're going to move back towards that direction, even though Governor Abbott opened up and he said, well, it's a state of emergency. I'm allowed to override that. How do we, what can we do? It's sort of like revolting, which is not something that we want to do.
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. I love the way you frame that, drawing the parallel between children and parents and us as individuals in the state. I want to emphasize that. That's the proper way of understanding how government works. Local governments, this is really, really key, really key. Local governments in Texas, cities and counties, are creations of the state. And so your crazy mayor and in Houston, and your crazy county judge in Houston, I don't usually say that about people, they really are that crazy, they are going to get their clocks cleaned in court because it is very clear where the authority lies. I had the great privilege of serving on Governor Abbott's strike force to reopen Texas last year. And while we didn't do everything perfectly, trust me, we should have opened much, much more quickly. The point is, Governor Abbott's not going to let that happen. And so if someone listened to how you asked that question and they agree with you 100%, call the governor's office today and encourage him to squash that nonsense in Houston.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If we need people to rise up and say things that are true, otherwise people are just going to roll over. And I mean, we see it now. People like just not obeying. And we were talking about this. He made the comment, and this is true of many of these overreach governors and mayors all over America. They say things, but they're working by fiat, and a lot of time the police officers, the enforcing body, is just disobeying. And what can they do?
Yeah, that's right. And I think you made a good point about trying not to revolt. I would agree with that. There is a time and place for that, but it's pretty rare. What we can, however, do is engage in civil disobedience. And, my family and I we don't believe in mask mandates. We believe that if people want to be vaccinated, that's great. But, let's keep in mind the COVID vaccine is not a vaccine. It's a shot. It's relatively ineffective on the disease. But again, I respect people's decisions to make that, to go get that. Respect mine for not. Respect mine for not wearing a mask, which doesn't work. And let's get back to leading a normal life.
Amen. We have about a minute and a half left with Dr. Kevin Roberts, Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We've been talking about immigration and states' rights. I want to throw this out in the last question before we have to say goodbye. And the CDC mandating eviction moratorium, even though the Supreme Court has said otherwise, the current administration doesn't seem to care. That seems to be an expression of federal overreach, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it is. I'll tell you a quick story. In fact, a mutual friend probably of ours, but I'll leave him anonymous, called me. He said, Kevin, y'all have at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, you have a litigation center. What can you do about this eviction moratorium? And the reason he was asking is because he's a landlord. Now, he's not a landlord flush with cash. He's trying to get ahead in life, try to make a few $100 extra a month. And he had just a lout of a tenant even before COVID. And that tenant is using this as an example or as reason not to pay rent. That is costing our mutual friend his livelihood. It may even cost him his main house. And I think that's the way to understand this. The second thing is we filed suit. We won a couple of steps along the way. This eviction moratorium is awful. When we talk about it being against private property rights, remember, to the point of the story, put faces on that and understand that it's costing people money and their livelihood. It's wrong.
Wow. All right. We'll have to leave it there. Dr. Kevin Roberts with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thank you for your time today. We're very grateful.
Take care. God bless you.
Praise be to God.
If you like that interview, then be sure to check out some of our other interviews that you might find fascinating. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share this interview with someone that you think will find this informative and inspiring. God love you.